The silence that followed those words was more painful than any scream. On the other end of the line, my daughter's voice came through, steady, almost rehearsed. "It's time, Mom. Your room now belongs to Crystal." There was no room for a reply. The call ended, leaving behind only the metallic buzz that seemed to mock my loneliness. My chest burned as if the air had suddenly grown too heavy to breathe. I was in the kitchen, the morning sun slipping through the thin curtains, lighting up the table where I had so often served coffee to my family. But suddenly, everything felt strange, as if I had been expelled from my own story. The room. My room. The only shelter left to me since Samuel had passed 2 years ago. There were my whispered prayers before sleep, the soft scent of lavender on the pillow, the framed picture from our wedding day. And now, according to my daughter Melissa, this sacred space was to be given to her wife, Crystal. My eyes lifted to the crucifix above the door. The simple wood, darkened by time, had always been my reminder that God would never abandon me. But for a moment, even my faith faltered. How can a daughter look her own mother in the eye and decide she no longer deserves a room? I rose slowly, feeling the weight of my 68 years in every joint. I walked to the living room mirror. Deep wrinkles traced maps of old battles across my face. My hands, rough with calluses, stood as silent witnesses to a lifetime of care, first for my parents, then for Melissa, and finally for Samuel. Everything I built had been for my family, and yet I was treated like a burden. The memory of Melissa's laughter as a child pierced me like an arrow. She used to run through that same hallway, braids bouncing, eyes shining as she called me "Dear Mommy." Where was that little girl? Who was this cold woman now, capable of pushing me out of my own space for someone else? I sat back down, trying to hold back the tears. The salty taste already burned my throat. I drew a deep breath in silence, as though reaching for strength in a well that seemed dry. "Don't cry, Clara," I told myself. "They want to see you weak, but you are not weak. You never were." In that moment, something stirred inside me. It wasn't anger, nor resignation. It was a painful kind of clarity. I realized that if I did nothing, I would be reduced to a guest in my own life. And the truth was, I wasn't ready to surrender my dignity. I looked around the house. Every object carried memories. The wall clock Samuel had fixed dozens of times, the quilt I had stitched on cold nights, the prayer books filled with notes in the margins. This house was not just wood and brick. It was the living testimony of who I was, of who I still am. And to allow it to be taken from me would be to accept dying in silence. Yet at the same time, a cruel doubt crept in. What else was Melissa hiding from me? The way she hung up, curt, without remorse, made me believe this was only the beginning of something larger, something I did not yet understand. The morning sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the table. I touched Samuel's portrait, the glass cold under my fingers. "Help me, my love," I whispered. "I don't know how to face our own daughter." Then I remembered a forgotten detail, almost erased by the pain of mourning. Weeks before he passed, Samuel had given me a brown envelope, asking me to open it only when I felt ready. That day, I barely had the strength to tuck it into a drawer. After that, I never thought of it again, until now. I stood up, my heart racing, and walked down the hallway to the bedroom. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer of the dresser. The envelope was still there, untouched, my name written in Samuel's firm handwriting. For a moment, I thought of tearing it open immediately, but something stopped me. And as the weight of that secret rested between my fingers, a single question tormented me. What did Samuel know that I still didn't? The weight of the years pressed against my shoulders as the rough paper brushed my skin. The envelope felt heavier than it should, as if each crease held a part of my story. The clock ticked the same rhythm as the nights I waited for Melissa to come home. Now I was waiting for answers. I let memory open first. Before the seal, I saw my little girl with skinned knees and pink ribbons. I remembered taking 2 buses to clean houses and still baking a cake on her birthday. Samuel, with his large hands and gentle smile, fixed whatever was broken. The house was small, but the table always had bread, and God always found shelter within our walls. My hands trembled. I looked at them, veins raised, spots of sun. They had counted coins, brushed away goodbyes. They had cradled Melissa on her first day of life. They had held Samuel's ring when we promised love in joy and in sorrow. The hallway smelled of the wax I had spread just yesterday. The room they wanted to take was my sanctuary of prayer, the old lamp, the patchwork quilt, the Bible open at Psalm 23. It was there I spoke with God when no one else would listen. It was there I remembered Samuel's laughter, his hand on my neck when sleep wouldn't come. It was there I asked for peace when betrayal scratched at my soul. When Melissa was a child, I used to tell her, "Dignity is not Sunday's clothing, it's your skin." She would laugh and run into the yard. Today, the woman she became spoke like someone who had learned from strangers. At what corner had she traded respect for haste? I sat on the edge of the bed. The window creaked. The wind carried the scent of rain. I heard Samuel's voice. "Clara, courage is a prayer that stands tall." Perhaps there was still hope for the 2 of us. The phone buzzed. An unknown number appeared and vanished. I clutched the envelope. I could almost hear the paper begging to be opened. Almost. But before, another memory came. Melissa as a teenager, begging for a dress I couldn't afford. I sold old rings and told her that one day she would understand. She never knew. Or does she need to? I drink water from a chipped glass. How much does it cost to keep your freedom when your own family corners you? How many layers of faith must you cross? "Lord, guide my steps," I whisper, and the word God lights up the night inside the room. The radio crackles in the kitchen. An old song fills the house. I go back to the porch with Samuel, my head resting on his shoulder. I promised I would protect our family. I promised no one would ever buy my self-worth. If this story has found you, stay with me. Let's cross this passage together. Subscribe to walk with me. I return to the bedroom. My hand glides over the dresser. The wrinkles of the wood speak to my own. Dignity, I repeat, to remind myself who I am when my daughter's voice tries to shrink me. The clock ticks louder, as if time itself wants to decide for me. I pull at the seal, but stop. What if what's inside is the last thing Samuel ever asked me to carry, or the first? Rain begins lightly on the roof. If you feel this truth needs to be revealed, come with me. Turn on notifications. I place the envelope on my lap. Open the drawer and take my mother's rosary. The ancestral strength warms my palms. "Never alone," I say, as if relearning the language of hope, like if faith has held you up too. The phone vibrates. This time the name on the screen twists my stomach. Melissa. I don't answer. I can't. Not before hearing Samuel. If you've made it this far, hold my hand. What I'm about to discover could change everything. Comment, "I'm with you." I grip the seal's edge. I hear the paper crack. I open it a centimeter. Ink and bank smell. Then, from the living room, a sound froze me. The doorknob turned on its own. If that sent shivers down your spine too, breathe with me and don't let go. Subscribe. The next part is coming. I turn slowly, my feet cold on the floorboards. Who enters without knocking? The envelope is open, and I still haven't seen what Samuel left. Maybe whoever is about to cross that door knows more than I should. I breathe slowly. Thought, after everything I gave, my own daughter treats me like an inconvenience. The phrase spun in my head like an endless echo, bouncing off the bedroom walls and striking my chest. It was as if Melissa had erased every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered for her. I was no longer a mother. To her, I was just an obstacle. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood of the door. Tears streamed down, but there was no comfort in them. What hurts more? Losing the respect of those you love, or realizing the love you gave was never enough to be remembered. The lavender scent on the pillow brought back nights when I sang Melissa to sleep. My voice was fragile, but she would calm down, clinging to my neck. Today, that same daughter wanted to rip from me the only space still holding our story. The hallway felt longer than ever. I walked to the living room, where family portraits still lined the shelf. I ran my finger along the frames, remembering parties, diplomas, birthdays. Everything now felt like a lie. How can someone do this to their own mother? The question pounded harder than any memory. In the glass reflection, I saw my face marked by time. The wrinkles around my eyes were letters written by life, lines of a story of work and renunciation. I carried pride in them, but at that moment I felt shame, not for me, but for what Melissa had become. What failed? What did I teach wrong? I opened the window, and the wind brought the scent of wet earth. I remembered Samuel. He always said, "Clara, respect is the last possession a man or woman should lose." I shut my eyes, searching for his voice inside me, and then something stirred in my memory. 3 weeks before he died, Samuel had called me to the porch. His breathing was shallow, but his gaze remained firm. "If one day you feel the ground has been pulled out from under your feet, look for what I left you. It's not just about possessions, Clara. It's about strength. One day, you will need it." At the time, the pain of goodbye spoke louder than any words. I stored that moment in a corner of my memory, buried under tears and prayers. But now, faced with my daughter's betrayal, the memory returned like lightning splitting the sky. What had Samuel left behind? Where was this strength he had promised? I closed the window. The wind stopped, and the house sank into a dense silence. I felt as if Samuel were there, somewhere between shadow and light. My heart raced. It wasn't just spiritual comfort. There was something real, something concrete, waiting for me. I ran my hand across the dresser, opening drawers in search of answers. My mother's rosary appeared among yellowed papers, and with it, a vague memory, an envelope Samuel had given me shortly before his departure. "Use it when you need it," he had said. And now, with my dignity under threat, I knew the moment had come. But what I found when I touched that envelope made me catch my breath. If you believe dignity should never be negotiated, leave an amen in the comments. Subscribe now. Don't miss the revelation of what Samuel left behind. Have you ever faced disappointment within your own family? Share your story. Your voice may bring comfort to another woman. Like this video, if you also believe faith and courage walk hand in hand. My fingers trembled, because inside that envelope lay something that could change everything. Melissa's words still pounded in my mind, but something stronger began to surface. A memory stored away, buried under months of grief. I was sitting on the edge of the bed when Samuel's voice returned like a whisper from memory. "Clara, if you ever feel the ground has been pulled out from under your feet, go to First National Bank. Ask for the safe deposit box in my name. It is yours too. One day, you'll understand why." At the time, I thought it was just Samuel's exaggerated caution, his habit of wanting to protect everything and everyone. He had always been meticulous with every penny, every detail. I would smile, tell him not to worry, that we had each other, and that was enough. But now, alone, betrayed by my own daughter, I realized that warning had been more than care. It had been foresight. I rose slowly and walked to the mirror. The reflection showed not only wrinkles, but scars of silent battles. Hands that had steadied Melissa on her first steps, that had held Samuel through his final pains, now trembled at the courage I would need. Was I ready to open a past he had kept hidden from me? The night deepened, and every sound in the house seemed to carry a secret meaning. The creak of the hallway boards, the wind rattling the windows, even the relentless tick of the clock. Everything pushed me toward a decision I had delayed too long. Samuel had left something hidden in iron and silence, waiting for the right moment. I closed my eyes and remembered the last time he spoke of it. We were on the porch, the sky painted orange by the sunset. Samuel squeezed my hand and said, "Clara, promise me you won't be afraid. Life can be cruel, but God always leaves a way out. When the time comes, seek what I prepared. It will be your strength." In that instant, I felt the same faith that had sustained us through 40 years of marriage. I breathed deeply, knelt by the bed, and let the prayer rise, simple and sincere. Lord, give me courage to face what He left for me. A soft peace swept through my chest. I knew I wasn't alone. I stood with new resolve. Tomorrow morning, I would go to the bank. The time for hesitation was over. It was no longer just about defending a room. It was about defending my dignity. But as I closed the curtains, something made me shiver. Outside, on the wet sidewalk, I saw two shadows talking. One of them was Crystal. What was she doing there so late at night? The next morning, when I walked through the bank doors, my legs trembled. But nothing could have prepared me for what I would find inside that safe deposit box. The bell of the small chapel rang softly as I pushed open the wooden door. The smell of burning candles and old wood wrapped around me like an invisible embrace. I walked slowly to the front pew, my knees heavy, my heart pounding as if ready to betray me. I sat and let the sacred silence of the church swallow me whole. I knelt. My wrinkled hands folded instinctively, and from my lips came a whisper that seemed centuries old. Lord, I don't know what Samuel left for me. I don't know if I'll have the strength to carry what's in that vault. But I know I cannot face this alone. Stay with me. The echo of my prayer spread across the arched ceiling, as if angels themselves carried it upward. That's when I felt a hand rest on my shoulder. I turned and saw Evelyn Carter, my dear friend of so many years. At 72, her eyes were as steady as the trunk of an ancient tree. She sat beside me, unhurried, as one who knows some pains need time. "Clara," she said, her voice low but full of tenderness. "I knew I would find you here. Whenever life gets heavy, you return to this pew." I smiled weakly. "It's the only place I still feel peace, Evelyn, where I still hear Samuel telling me not to give up." She drew a deep breath, clasping my hand firmly. "You know you're not alone, don't you? God still guides your steps. And Samuel, Clara, he was a man of vision. If he left something behind, it's because he wanted to make sure you would never be treated like a burden." Her words struck me like both blade and balm. A burden. That was exactly how Melissa treated me. But hearing from Evelyn that God did not see me that way helped me breathe deeper. The stained glass windows painted soft colors across the floor, washing my wrinkles in red and blue. It was as if each color whispered, "There is still hope." I closed my eyes again and repeated in silence. Dignity, respect, faith, words that could never be taken from me. Evelyn leaned closer and said something that made me shiver. "Clara, don't be afraid to open what Samuel left. Sometimes, blessing comes disguised as a secret." I bowed my head, silent tears wetting the handkerchief I always carry in my purse. There, on that worn wooden pew, I understood I needed to face my destiny not out of vengeance, but out of courage. When we left the church, the sun was already setting behind the trees. Evelyn embraced me tightly, the way only friends of faith know how to embrace. "Go to the bank tomorrow, Clara, and when you discover what's inside, tell me. Whatever it is, don't carry it alone." I nodded, but inside a storm was rising. Because deep down, I already knew what awaited me was not just inheritance, it was revelation. The next morning, as I walked through the doors of First National Bank, the look on the manager's face told me Samuel had prepared something far greater than I had ever imagined. The marble floor of the bank reflected the morning light, and each step echoed like a judgment. The manager, a man in a gray suit with round glasses, examined my documents carefully before leading me down a narrow hallway. The air there was cold, smelling of iron and secrecy. "This is the safe deposit box your husband left in your name, Mrs. Johnson," he said, handing me the key with almost ceremonial respect. My hands trembled, but I held firm. The metallic click seemed to shake my heart. When the heavy door swung open, the silence was cut only by the creak of metal. Inside, instead of keepsakes or small savings, there were neatly stacked folders, legal documents, purchase records, deeds with my name on them. My legs went weak, and I had to steady myself against the wall. I picked up the first bundle and opened it slowly. The shock stole my breath. Plots of land, houses, even a small commercial building downtown, all in my name. Samuel, my Samuel, the simple driver who came home smelling of gasoline and dust, had been, in fact, a silent investor. The manager cleared his throat respectfully. "Your husband began these investments over 20 years ago. He was discreet, but very careful. All the properties are legally registered. You are the sole owner." My eyes filled with tears. I remembered the nights Samuel said he was tired, the times he refused small luxuries saying we couldn't spend foolishly. I had never imagined that behind the simplicity there had been such a larger plan. He had hidden it all not out of distrust, but to protect me. I sat down on the small metal chair. The papers felt as heavy as stone in my hands. While Melissa treated me like a burden, I held the proof that my entire life was worth more than she could ever imagine. But one question burned inside me. Why had Samuel never told me? Perhaps he feared that if Melissa found out, she would see only money instead of family. And, in a way, he had been right. My daughter had never suspected a thing. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb the magnitude of the revelation. Silent tears slid down my cheeks. They weren't of sadness, but of gratitude and pain mixed together. Samuel had thought of everything. Even now, after death, he was still protecting me. I closed the folder and looked around the cold room. The loneliness of the place no longer frightened me. On the contrary, it was as if I were standing at the heart of everything Samuel had always been. Silent, steady, full of faith. When I left the bank, the sun blinded me for a moment. I walked slowly to the sidewalk, feeling the weight of the deeds in my bag. The world looked the same, but I knew nothing would ever be the same again. As I walked back home, one single question echoed inside me. How would I tell my daughter that everything she thought she controlled never belonged to her? The smell of roasted meat and cheap wine hung in the air when I entered the dining room. Melissa and Crystal were sitting side by side, their glasses throwing red reflections under the chandelier. Their laughter sliced the air like broken glass. "I've been thinking about turning her room into a giant closet," Crystal said, with that mocking tone she tried to pass off as a joke. "We'll finally have space for my clothes." Melissa laughed loudly, complicit. "It's true. Mom doesn't need so much space, anyway. It'll be good for everyone." The words cut into me like cold knives. I stayed silent, chewing slowly, as if every bite were an effort not to explode. The taste of the food was ashes in my mouth. Outwardly, I kept the serenity that had always accompanied me. Inwardly, however, a volcano began to stir. Crystal touched Melissa's arm and said in a conspiratorial tone, "Later, we could think about selling the whole house. On the market, it would bring a good amount. We just have to convince your mother it's for her own good." Melissa nodded, swirling her glass indifferently. she always gives in eventually. You just have to know how to talk to her. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes, once bright with innocence, now reflected calculation. I asked myself where I had lost that little girl. At what moment had love turned into coldness? The room was full of voices, but inside me there was only silence. The kind of silence that comes before a decision. I knew something they didn't know. Samuel had given me a secret strength, a solid foundation, and I had no intention of revealing it anytime soon. While they laughed, I traced my plan in my mind. There would be no shouting, no confrontations. I would let them believe they were in control. Because deep down, the one truly about to take charge of the game was me. I smiled discreetly, a smile no one noticed. Behind the mask of the submissive mother, the woman Samuel had always believed I could be was being born. That night, as I lay down, I realized I would no longer be a spectator of my own story. What I would do in silence would change everything. The next morning, I walked to the old law office on the corner of Main Street. The golden letters on the door still read, Williams & Associates. When I pushed the heavy handle, the smell of aged leather and paper stored for decades surrounded me. Inside, every detail seemed to carry Samuel's memory. It was with this trusted man that he had always handled the most serious matters. Mr. Williams rose from behind his desk, his glasses sliding down the tip of his nose. His hair was whiter than the last time I had seen him, but his warm smile was the same. Clara Johnson. It's been a while. I'm so sorry about Samuel's passing. He spoke of you at every meeting. I nodded, feeling the knot rise in my throat. But I hadn't come to relive memories. I needed answers. Mr. Williams, my daughter and her wife are trying to take me out of my room. They speak as if it already belongs to them. I need to know, can they legally expel me? He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his voice firm. No, Clara, absolutely not. Legally, your daughter has no power to make decisions about this house. She holds no power of attorney, no deed in her name. Everything remains exclusively yours. The weight I had carried in my chest dissolved for a moment. I drew a deep breath, and a different kind of peace filled me. I was not as unprotected as they believed. But, I continued, if I simply confront them, I know they'll find another way to manipulate me. What should I do? The attorney interlaced his fingers, thoughtful. Sometimes, Clara, the best defense is to let the enemy believe they're winning. If they think they have control, you can observe, prepare. When the time comes, you'll have the law. And something more important, the truth, on your side. His words echoed like confirmation of what Samuel always used to say. Dignity is not begged for, it is protected. I left the office with my heart racing, but not from fear. For the first time in a long while, I felt I carried an invisible weapon, knowledge. Melissa believed she had reduced me to a nuisance. But behind my silence, I was the rightful owner not only of this house, but of much more. As I walked down the sidewalk, I lifted my eyes to the sky. Thank you, Samuel, I whispered. You always knew this day would come. That night, as I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, I understood that my silence would be my greatest strategy, but I still had no idea of the storm about to fall upon Melissa. In the morning, I was the fragile widow everyone expected to see. I walked slowly to the bakery, the black dress still signaling morning, my eyes downcast, as if carrying an invisible burden. Neighbors offered sympathetic glances. Some asked if I needed help with the groceries. I thanked them with a timid smile, feigning gratitude, when in truth, my heart already beat to a different rhythm. Being seen as defenseless was useful. It gave me the freedom to act without suspicion. In the afternoon, I sat on the porch with embroidery in my hands, as if I were just another woman trying to pass the time. But inside, I was stitching something else. A plan. I remembered Mr. Williams's words. Let them think they're winning. That was exactly what I would do. At night, the scenery changed. The silent house became my headquarters. The kitchen table was covered with papers, notes, and records. The folders I had brought from the bank were hidden at the back of the cabinet, but I studied them as if decoding a treasure map. Every deed was a chess piece, and I was learning to move the pieces with precision. My fingers, once tired, now trembled with energy. Samuel always said I had more strength than I realized, but only now did I understand. I was no longer just the grieving widow, I was the guardian of a secret that could change my daughter's fate. While Melissa slept soundly, believing she was in control, I was becoming the woman she had never known, calculating, determined, sustained by a faith that burned quietly. "Lord," I murmured, "give me wisdom to use this strength at the right time. I don't want vengeance, I want justice." In the solitude of the kitchen, with every cup of tea, I felt less like a victim and more like the protagonist of my own life. But I also knew that a well-told lie can last a long time, until the day truth decides to appear. And that very same week, a forgotten object in the garden showed me the storm was only beginning. That morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still wrapped in shadows when I crossed the quiet hallway and opened the back door. The cold dawn air carried the scent of damp earth, and for an instant I went back in time, to when Samuel would rise with me to tend the garden before work. There, among the rose bushes, he seemed most whole, as if each sprout were an extension of his faith. I walked barefoot through the grass, still wet with dew. The garden was neglected, overtaken by weeds since he had gone. For months, I hadn't had the courage to touch the soil, as if disturbing it would profane his memory. But now, more than ever, I needed to feel his presence. I knelt by the flower beds, ran my hand through the dry earth, and felt it still held warmth. Samuel used to say that every seed has its own time, and that it was no use trying to force life to bloom before it was ready. "Clara," he reminded me, "some seeds only blossom after pain." I had never fully understood until that moment. Perhaps the pain Melissa was causing me was the bitter water preparing the harvest of something greater. My eyes filled with tears. But for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of recognition. Pain was reshaping me. I was no longer just the rejected mother, no longer only the widow left behind. I was being reborn, like those seeds that wait in silence beneath the earth until the right moment to break through. As I pulled out the first weed, I heard Samuel's voice in memory. "It is not in man's time, but in God's time." My hands grew dirty with soil, but along with the dirt I felt life pulsing again. With every handful uprooted, it seemed I was also tearing away part of the bitterness that had consumed me. I sat on the wooden bench he had built himself, still strong despite the years. The wind rustled the leaves, and for an instant, I swore I heard his laughter among the branches. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I will not give up, Samuel. I promise I will bloom, even in the pain." I rose with determination. I picked up the small spade leaning in the corner and began to turn the earth. "Clara," he reminded me, "some seeds only blossom after pain." I had never fully understood until that moment. Perhaps the pain Melissa was causing me was the bitter water preparing the harvest of something greater. My eyes filled with tears. But for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of recognition. Pain was reshaping me. I was no longer just the rejected mother, no longer only the widow left behind. I was being reborn, like those seeds that wait in silence beneath the earth until the right moment to break through. As I pulled out the first weed, I heard Samuel's voice in memory. "It is not in man's time, but in God's time." My hands grew dirty with soil, but along with the dirt I felt life pulsing again. With every handful uprooted, it seemed I was also tearing away part of the bitterness that had consumed me. I sat on the wooden bench he had built himself, still strong despite the years. The wind rustled the leaves, and for an instant, I swore I heard his laughter among the branches. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I will not give up, Samuel. I promise I will bloom, even in the pain." I rose with determination. I picked up the small spade leaning in the corner and began to turn the earth. The rich smell of roots brought back memories of sunny Sundays when Melissa was still a child, running barefoot through the garden, never imagining she would one day try to steal her own mother's dignity. I touched the trunk of a tree Samuel had planted the year she was born. Strong, steady, surviving so many storms. That is how I needed to be. The sky began to lighten, painting the horizon in gold. The light fell upon an abandoned flower bed, where a single blossom was timidly sprouting, one I didn't remember planting. I knelt before it, astonished. How had it survived without care, without water, without attention? Perhaps it was the message I needed. Some things bloom precisely in absence, in abandonment, in pain. I stayed there, caressing the delicate petals, and understood that the garden was more than memory. It was a metaphor for my own life. Samuel had left roots I was meant to honor. If he had trusted me to carry the inheritance hidden in the vault, it was because he believed that even wounded, I could still bloom. I returned inside with clothes stained by earth and a heart that felt lighter. Melissa might think she had reduced me to an inconvenience, but the truth was that I was only preparing myself. Like the garden, I too would have my time to blossom. And that very night, as the moon cast its light over the renewed garden, an unexpected sound at the door made me realize that my seeds of courage were about to be tested. The smell of polished wood still lingered in the air when I noticed the emptiness in the living room. The china cabinet I had inherited from my mother was gone. The Persian rug, a wedding gift from a distant aunt, had vanished too. I walked slowly, my feet heavy on the floorboards, and each absence felt like an open wound. The wall clock, which Samuel had repaired so many times, was missing. Even the dining chairs had been taken. I heard muffled laughter down the hall and followed the sound. There, I found Melissa and Crystal carrying a box filled with my picture frames. Samuel's smiling face, frozen in a photo from our 30th wedding anniversary, was tossed among papers and trinkets as if it meant nothing at all. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, almost sweet, though inside my soul was burning. Melissa brushed her hair back, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, we sold a few things. The house was cluttered with old furniture, taking up space. Crystal got a good deal with an antiques dealer in town." Crystal smiled with satisfaction, like someone who had won a battle. "It all happened quickly. They took almost everything at once. At least now the space looks cleaner, don't you think?" I looked at the empty spot where the sofa had been, the one where Samuel and I had spent so many nights talking. It was as if the memory itself had been ripped out with the worn fabric. I forced a fragile smile. "If you think this is better?" Melissa seemed to relax at my reply. "I knew you'd understand, Mom. You always do. We're going to use the money to invest in some important things." I didn't ask in what. I knew it was just another lie among so many. I chose to watch in silence. The game had changed now. Shouting or pleading would be useless. Samuel had taught me to wait for the right time to harvest, and I would wait. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. The room echoed with emptiness, as if the house itself had lost its voice. I ran my fingers across the scratched table they hadn't taken. There were still pen marks from Melissa's childhood, crooked lines from when she was learning to write her name. I smiled bitterly. How had that sweet little girl turned into someone capable of selling her own story for a handful of dollars? I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. Some seeds only bloom after pain. I repeated Samuel's phrase in my mind. They could take the furniture, but they could not uproot my roots. I would pretend acceptance, I would pretend fragility. Meanwhile, every absence in the house would become fuel for my resolve. In the middle of the night, I walked through the garden and touched the trunk of the tree Samuel had planted. "They think they're defeating me," I whispered. "But they have no idea I am the one learning how to fight." The next morning, when I awoke, I found something even more cruel. The old family Bible was no longer on my nightstand. And it was then I realized just how far my daughter was willing to go. The house seemed to breathe a different air since the furniture was taken. A cold air, like a hospital room. I spent the morning gathering tiny fragments of memory. A button from Samuel's coat lost beneath the floorboard, an old hair ribbon of Melissa's, a crumpled note in my handwriting that said, "Be right back, love." I placed everything in a shoebox, like seeds gathered before a storm. At noon, I heard whispers coming from the hallway. I stood in the doorway, invisible as a shadow. Melissa's voice was too low for someone with nothing to hide. Crystal's, sharp and impatient, answered her without kindness. "We can't back out now, Mel. We've already sold half the house. The antiques dealer isn't going to change his mind." "I know," Melissa's voice trembled. "But my mother—" "Your mother will adjust. She always does. The focus now is money. You're behind on your credit cards and the car loan. Remember?" The ground shifted beneath my feet. Debts. My daughter was drowning and I hadn't known. The image of the giant closet Crystal dreamed of shattered in my memory like glass. It wasn't whimsy. It was hunger for money. And like all hunger, it knew no respect. "We'll figure it out," Melissa said, trying to sound firm. "When my colleague's investment pays off, we'll settle everything." Crystal let out a short laugh. "Investment? Wake up. No one promised you anything. You need money now. And the fastest way is to simplify this house. Sell, or at the very least, get her out of the way so we can breathe. I won't live squeezed by nostalgia." The word nostalgia struck me like a slap. For Crystal, life was a hallway of doors exchanged at convenience. For me, each door guarded the perfume of years. I gripped the doorframe, motionless. I wanted to walk in, to say I knew, that I saw everything. Instead, I listened. "Crystal, she's my mother." "And I'm your wife," she shot back, her voice low and sharp. "Family is who builds the now, not who keeps you trapped in the past. If you truly love us, fix this. Start by taking the room. Today." Melissa fell silent. The kitchen clock struck twice, each chime like a verdict. A metallic taste filled my mouth. I remembered the nights I scraped coins together to pay for her prep courses, the letters I wrote to calm her fears, the day I sold my old wedding rings to buy the dress she wanted for the dance. Her debt wasn't only with the bank. It was with me, not of money, but of respect. I returned to the kitchen without making a sound. I set water to boil, just to give my hands a task besides trembling. The kettle sang as they walked in. I feigned surprise. "Tea?" I offered, in the same voice with which I once offered a lap. "No, thank you," Crystal replied, her eyes scanning the space like a realtor assessing square footage. "We need to talk, Clara, about changes." Melissa couldn't hold my gaze. There was exhaustion around her eyes, the kind I recognized, the kind that comes from negotiating away too much of one's peace. Crystal took the lead. "The room. We'll need it. Today. The truck arrives in an hour." So simple, so surgical. I breathed in, feeling the steam from the tea dampen my face, as if the house itself were weeping with me. I fixed my eyes on Melissa, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't cruelty. It was fear, a childish fear, dressed in high heels. "If it's about space," I said, "we can rearrange the house." Crystal arched a brow. "It's not arrangement, it's decision, and it's now." Silence. Melissa opened her mouth to say something, but swallowed the words. Crystal dug into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. I made a list of what's leaving today. She extended it toward me like an officer serving a warrant. I took the paper. At the top, master bedroom. Below, items that weren't just things: dresser, nightstand, trunk at the foot of the bed. The trunk of letters Samuel had written to me during his double shifts. My heart skipped a beat. "It's only for a little while," Melissa murmured, as if asking for absolution. "Until we organize the finances." The word finances floated between us, never landing. I could, with a single phrase, extinguish the storm. No, because this house is mine, because the deed is in my name, because you have no legal power. I could unsheath the truth like a sword. But a sword drawn too soon wounds those you want to protect. I remembered Mr. Williams's counsel. Let them think they're winning. I had learned from Samuel to harvest at the right time. I folded the paper, calmly. I understand. Melissa's eyes lifted, surprised. Crystal smiled, premature victory dancing at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you for understanding," she said, already typing on her phone. "I'll tell the driver everything is ready." I stepped away to boil more water. The sound of the faucet became a curtain for the next exchange, hushed, almost a whisper. "See?" Crystal hissed. "She won't fight back. You just have to push." "I don't like this," Melissa replied, her voice breaking. "But I don't see another way. I'm at my limit, Crystal." "Then stop feeling guilty and do it. Debt unpaid doesn't disappear with prayer." I prayed. Not that they would stop, not that the truck would be delayed. I prayed to be guided. "Lord, give me the courage of one who plants, the patience of one who waits, and the precision of one who harvests at the right time." The kettle sang again. Its sound brought me a thought sharp as a blade. Their haste would be my ally. Whoever runs without watching the ground trips over their own plan. The doorbell rang. The truck. Crystal went to answer. Melissa stayed, frozen, her eyes fixed on the cup of tea I had served unsweetened, just as Samuel liked it. For a second, she touched the hot rim, as if reaching for memory. I longed to take her hand, but held back. Love that rescues before the drowning only teaches not to swim. "Mom," she said, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." I did not answer. Sometimes the deepest forgiveness is the one that arrives in silence and waits. I stepped away, letting the hallway swallow my back. The house filled with footsteps, voices, the dragging of furniture. Each noise was a cut into the past. When they opened the trunk, the air shifted. It felt as though the wood had released the old perfume of letters long kept. I ran my fingers across the table, begging my hands not to tremble. And that's when I heard Crystal from the bedroom. "These old papers, throw them out. They're worthless." The world tilted. I took 2 steps and stopped in the doorway. Melissa held a letter in her hands, yellowed paper, Samuel's handwriting, our past breathing again. She looked at me. Crystal held out the trash bag. "Come on, Mel. We don't have all day." Melissa lowered her eyes to the letter. I saw the battle on her face, debt against memory, fear against dignity. And it was in that instant, at arm's length, that I understood the depth of the precipice my daughter was living in. She raised the letter, hesitating. And before I could say a word, Crystal's phone vibrated loudly on the dresser. A short message, a name on the screen, and the color drained from her face. Whatever she read erased her smile as if someone had turned off the light. And I knew, with the certainty only intuition gives, that the message wasn't about furniture. It was about everything they thought they controlled. By late afternoon, the moving truck was gone, leaving behind a mutilated house, bare walls, echoes where once there had been laughter and furniture heavy with memory. I walked slowly through the living room, like someone crossing a battlefield after war. Only boxes remained, stacked in haste, scrawled with black marker, junk, old clothes, donations. It was when I approached one of these boxes that my heart stopped. Among worn coats and torn paperbacks, I saw the dark, time-worn leather I could have recognized blind. My Bible, the same one my mother gave me on my 18th birthday. The same one I carried to the altar the day Samuel said, "Forever." The same one I held through nights when fear threatened to steal my sleep. I knelt before the box, my hands trembling, and pulled it out slowly. The smell of old pages, mixed with the perfume of pressed flowers I had kept inside, struck me with the force of an embrace from the past. How could anyone throw that away? I turned the pages carefully, and every underlined verse, every margin note, was a fragment of my life. There were the prayers I'd marked when Melissa was a child burning with fever. Notes from Sunday sermons, scribbled quickly because Samuel always nudged me not to miss a word. Even the dried petal of the rose Melissa gave me on Mother's Day when she was 10. My throat closed. The weight of betrayal no longer lay in the sold furniture or the stolen photographs. It was there, in the disdain for what sustained my soul. To sell my table, my rug, even my trunk of memories, was painful. But to throw my Bible into a box of donations, that was more than carelessness. It was a denial of who I was. I closed my eyes, clutching the book against my chest. The cold wood of the floor touched my knees. But inside, something warmed. They could try to strip me of everything, but they could not take my faith. They could not sever my roots. As I breathed deeply, I remembered a distant night. Samuel and I had just been told the bank would seize our small house if we didn't settle the debt by month's end. I cried in despair. But Samuel opened this very Bible, laid it on the table, and said, "Clara, they can take the roof above our heads, but they can't take what God built in here." And he pointed to his heart. That memory lifted me. I wiped my tears and stood, still clutching the Bible to my chest. Perhaps that was the message I needed then. Faith is not negotiable. It is a treasure that cannot be sold, donated, or discarded. I returned to the kitchen, where the emptiness seemed to scream. I set the Bible on the table as if on an altar. The faint afternoon light filtered through the window and fell across its open pages, illuminating Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" I smiled in silence. There was no coincidence, only providence. It was as if God himself was reminding me that even in betrayal, I was not alone. Melissa entered the room just then. When she saw me with the Bible in my hands, she froze. Her gaze faltered, as if she felt shame, but she quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Crystal, behind her, only sighed impatiently and said, "Mother, that's old stuff. Leave it aside. Someone else might need it more than you." I did not reply. I simply caressed the worn cover and thought, "You don't know what you need, but I do." That night, I sat before the open Bible and prayed a different prayer. I didn't ask God to change my daughter. I asked him to show me how far I must go to teach her the value of what she was destroying. 3 days later, the house awoke with a silence like an empty church. I was watering the freshly cleared flower bed when I heard hurried footsteps at the gate. It wasn't Crystal's hard stride, nor the dragging shuffle of delivery men. It was a familiar stumble, a sob disguised as breath. I turned, and there was Melissa standing on the sidewalk, mascara running, hair tied hastily. The same little girl who once ran through that yard with scraped knees, begging for comfort. Only now, the wound was inside. "Mom," her voice broke, "can I come in?" I opened the gate. She crossed as if walking through a desert to reach the first patch of shade. Her hands trembled. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she looked older than yesterday. "The investment, Mom." She swallowed hard. It was a lie. They promised returns in 15 days, guarantees that never existed. I put in everything. Credit cards, loans, salary advances, even the money from the furniture is gone. There's nothing left. The world narrowed between us. I wanted to touch her face, but held back. Her pain called me. My dignity restrained me. "And Crystal?" I asked softly. Melissa looked aside, as though searching for an exit on the ceiling. She said she wasn't born to fight in the mud, that she needs movement and opportunities. She took her clothes and left. I called, I sent messages. She replied that she needs to think and that the emotional pressure is too much. She gave a humorless laugh. I must be the pressure. The wind turned the lemon tree's leaves, and for a moment, only their rustle answered for me. I saw in my daughter's face the exhaustion of someone lost in haste. She walked into the kitchen, stopped before the bare table, and ran her hand across its scratched surface. The same gesture she made as a child when she asked me to draw hearts in the steam on the window. I know what I did. The words fell like stones. I sold your history, Mom. I wounded what was sacred. I thought I was building a better life, and she bit her lip, as if to keep the sob from becoming a flood. Can I sleep here tonight? Just tonight, until I figure out what to do. The question was simple. The answer was not. Inside me, two voices fought an old battle. The mother who wants to pull up the blanket, the woman who had learned, late but learned, that love without limits becomes ground for others to trample. Faith, which had never failed me, whispered like a breeze, be a shelter, but not a bridge to the abyss. I pulled out a chair. Melissa sat, her palms flat on the table like surrender. I stood before her and breathed until the pain ordered my words. You can stay. I saw relief explode in her eyes, and I raised my hand so she wouldn't mistake it. For one night. We'll begin with one night. You are safe here. But some things have changed, Melissa. In this house, dignity has an owner, and it is not for sale. She nodded quickly, like someone drinking water before asking the price. The tears returned, defenseless, and I let her cry. I didn't embrace her. Sometimes an embrace too soon strips the weight before the lesson is written. I stayed nearby, present. Presence is also love. I tried so hard, she whispered. I only wanted Crystal to see me as someone who could make it, that I wasn't a burden. That word, burden, pierced me. How many times in recent months had I felt it pressing on my chest? How many times had I heard the same sentence in different clothes? Junk, nostalgia, nuisance. The wheel had turned, and now my daughter stood at the center of the same verdict that had been cast upon me. Listen, I said, finally sitting. The world shouts value and points at money, but true value is what you don't let anyone take. Respect, peace, faith, you bargained all that away for quick promises. Now you will relearn it slowly. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the way she did at 6 years old. Do I deserve this place? After what I did? A place is not something you deserve. It's something you build, I replied. You dismantled the house, but you didn't bring down the foundation. I am still here. God is still here. And there are consequences, because love also means setting boundaries. A dense silence wrapped us. From the street came the distant rumble of a bus. From the garden, the green scent of freshly turned soil. Samuel seemed to lean on the doorway, invisible and steady, as always. I felt courage arrive with him. I have questions, Melissa, I continued, and I won't accept half-truths. Who introduced you to this investment? Where are the contracts? Whose name is signed? And most of all, why was my Bible in a box of donations? She broke down again, this time with shames too large for her body to contain. I didn't even see. I signed so many things. Crystal handled the papers. She said the guy behind it was serious. She sucked in a breath. Mom, I don't know what's serious anymore. I only know that I'm afraid. Afraid. The word my daughter had never allowed me to say aloud. I handed her a glass of water. She drank as if drinking the future. Go rest, I whispered. The guest room is clean. Tomorrow we begin. Begin what? I looked toward the window. The last trace of sun was surrendering the sky, and the house, emptied of furniture, filled with something more solid. The truth. She rose slowly, not knowing where to place her hands. She paused at the hallway door. Mom, thank you. I nodded, without smiling. Gratitude is a seed. Before it blooms, it must root. When the floorboard stopped creaking under her steps, I sat once more at the table and opened my Bible to Psalm 126. Those who sow in tears shall reap with joy. I touched the words like touching a map. My harvest would not be for humiliation. It would be for teaching. The house darkened completely. Outside, a car slowed at the gate and lingered, engine running, spilling light into the room. 1 second, 2. The headlights swept across the bare walls as if searching for someone. The engine cut off. The gate latch creaked open, slow, and before I could rise, a voice pierced the night, sweet as venom. Clara, can we talk for a minute? It was Crystal, alone, and without her usual smile. The night felt heavier as I opened the door. Crystal stood there, her face lit only by the dim glow of the street lamp. There was no makeup, no smile, only restless eyes, like someone calculating every word before letting it fall. Melissa appeared behind me, her face still wet with tears. When she saw her wife, her whole body bent with a mixture of relief and fear. You two, please, come in, I said, with a calm that didn't match the storm inside me. The living room was almost empty, yet not empty enough to hide the chill that swept through when Crystal crossed the threshold. She looked around as though she were a guest, not the mistress, and that told me more than her words. Melissa rushed to her, trying to grasp her hand. Crystal allowed the touch, but her eyes kept roaming, analyzing the space she herself had helped dismantle. I sat at the bare table and pointed to the chairs. They settled in. Melissa's breathing was anxious, like a child awaiting punishment. Crystal, however, sat upright, arms crossed, a wall disguising its crack. Mom, I knew you wouldn't leave me alone, Melissa said, her voice unsteady. I always said you had the most compassionate heart in the world. I smiled faintly, but gave no reply. Compassionate. It was the word Melissa had repeated since childhood, every time she wanted me to give in. Now she believed that the same heart which had protected her in childhood would rescue her in her fall. What she didn't know was that my silence carried a plan. Melissa, you can stay here, I said, looking straight at her. This is still your home. She cried again, this time tears of relief. She gripped my hand tightly, like someone clinging to a life preserver in a storm. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't turn your back on me. But Crystal did not celebrate. She stayed quiet, analyzing every move of mine. Her eyes narrowed as she realized there was more firmness in my voice than Melissa perceived. Perhaps she sensed that I was no longer the vulnerable widow I had seemed. Perhaps she felt the game had shifted to another board. Melissa, in her naivety, believed she had received a gesture of compassion. She didn't understand that behind the shelter, there was strategy. I would not leave her alone, but not to spare her. I needed her close, inside the house, so she could learn from every consequence of what she had done. Love didn't demand vengeance of me, but it demanded discipline. I pushed a cup of tea toward her hands. Melissa thanked me, her eyes glowing with gratitude. Crystal only watched, not touching her cup. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft patter of rain beginning on the roof. Thank you, Mom, Melissa repeated, exhausted. you still believe in me." I touched her hand in return, but my gaze rested on the Bible lying open on the table, at Psalm 126. I knew that night was not an ending, but a beginning. Melissa thought she had returned because of her mother's compassionate heart. But deep down, she had returned into the plan Samuel and I, in different ways, had prepared to teach her that dignity is not negotiable. And while Melissa slept in the guest room, believing herself safe, I knew the real lesson had yet to begin. The house would no longer be the shelter of her recklessness, but the stage of her transformation. The house slept. The kitchen clock read 2:47 when I pushed open my bedroom door and let the shadows embrace me. The mattress still carried the weight of nights when I had wept in silence, but that night I didn't want to cry. I wanted to listen. I set the Bible on the chair, knelt on the worn rug, and pressed my hands against the bed as if planting roots. The wind moved through the cracks of the window, making the curtain breathe slowly, as though the house itself were praying with me. "Lord," I began, and the word came whole, unhurried. "I know the sound of this midnight. It's the same sound of the hospital when Samuel stopped answering, the same silence when Melissa slammed the door the first time, the same shadow that visits those learning to stand again. I haven't come to ask for vengeance. I've come to ask for wisdom." The floor was cold, but my chest grew warm. I closed my eyes and told my story as though God had never heard it, not for him, but for me. I told of the table sold, of the wedding portrait taken as junk, of the trunk opened with letters that still smelled of our beginning. I told of the Bible in the donation box, and of how faith did not fit into the bag of discard. "They may try to take everything, Lord, but they cannot take your voice." Silence. Only the ticking. I heard Melissa's distant breath, steady, like a child finally asleep. I thought of the little girl with scraped knees, the feverish teenager, the woman who had traded hope for hurry. The anger that had haunted me these past days knocked at the door for a second, but did not enter. "Do not let me be a mirror of what hurt me," I whispered. "Do not let me confuse justice with humiliation. Teach me to set borders without breaking the skin. Show me where the embrace ends and discipline begins." I opened the Bible at random, and my eyes fell on Proverbs. "Wisdom builds the house." The verse burned inside me like a coal. Build the house. It wasn't about walls. It was about the space we give truth to dwell in. "If it is your will, Lord, I will teach. Not to win, but to save what can still be saved within her." I sat back on my heels and breathed again, long, deep. My hands, so often trembling, found their rhythm. I saw Samuel leaning on the doorway, not as a ghost, but as faithful memory. And I heard the phrase he repeated when life pressed hard. "Courage is a prayer on its feet." I rose slowly, practicing the word. In the hallway, the house felt like a great vessel advancing through still waters. I passed the guest room. The door was ajar. Melissa slept askew, clutching a pillow without a case. The faint street lamp painted innocence on her face, innocence that daylight would hide behind fear. I touched the doorknob, then withdrew. The urge to tuck her blanket in came strong, but I let the chill remind her this was no hotel. It was a restart, and restart learns from the night. I returned to the kitchen. I brewed coffee in silence, not to chase away sleep, but to awaken clarity. I sat at the table with the brown-covered notebook Samuel used to call his book of plans. Between recipes and old bills, I began to write the discipline I myself would have to sustain. Simple, clear rules, born of someone who had learned that respect is not declared, it is practiced. Rule 1, my house has an owner, and its name is dignity. Rule 2, prayer is the pillar. It begins the day, carries the middle, gathers the night. Rule 3, Truth must be signed, no whispered promises, everything in writing. Rule 4, debt must face the light, whoever hides loses the door. Rule 5, boundaries are love. Without them, no one finds themselves. I wrote slowly, like sowing seeds. I would not humiliate my daughter. Humiliation stuns, it doesn't transform. I would teach her. Teaching hurts, but it heals. And if I had to strip away the stage of her excuses, I would do it with a firm voice and clean hands. My freedom would not be hostage to anyone's despair. God had not rescued me so that I might become a step beneath someone's feet again. I raised the cup to my lips and felt the thin bitterness of cold coffee remind me the night was passing. Outside, a dog barked at nothing, and a faraway siren drew a thin line of an awakened city. I knelt again, this time without words, only my whole body saying, "Here I am." A quiet peace, the kind that makes no noise, settled on the floor. I understood, strength would not be a shout, it would be constancy. When I rose, the list was finished. Only one line remained, which my heart asked me to write last. I love you, daughter. And because I do, I will no longer protect you from yourself. I copied the sentence onto a separate sheet. At the top, I wrote Covenant of Truth. The ink dried with a stubborn shine, as if it too refused to be erased. I held the page up to the light and saw my own name reflected in the window pane. Dawn had not yet arrived, but the night no longer weighed me down. I touched the crucifix above the door and whispered thanks. Thank you for giving me back my backbone, Lord. I will not use your strength to wound. I will use it to uphold. I had taken 3 steps toward the hallway when the phone buzzed on the table. A new message. The number was unknown, no photo. I opened it. Clara, we need to talk about the properties. Today, before your daughter signs anything. My blood froze, then boiled in the same heartbeat. Properties. Before she signed what? I lifted my eyes toward the guest room door. Melissa shifted in her sleep, restless, as if the message had passed through the walls. The night held its breath with me, and I knew that what I had decided at the foot of the bed, to teach, not to humiliate, would be tested before the sun even rose. Mr. Williams' office smelled of old leather and fresh coffee. The tall shelves, heavy with dusty books, seemed to observe every word spoken in that room. Melissa entered first, her shoulders bent like someone awaiting the verdict of a tribunal. I followed, holding the folder firmly, not only paper, but destiny. The attorney rose with his usual calm. He greeted us and gestured for us to sit. Melissa clasped her nervous hands in her lap, looking at me as though searching for a salvation she didn't yet know existed. I let the silence weigh for a few seconds before opening the folder. Melissa, I began, my voice steadier than my heart, I want you to see something Samuel and I kept in secret. I pulled out the first deed and slid it across the desk, then another and another. A pile of documents grew before my daughter's disbelieving eyes. The name written on every page left no room for doubt. Clara Johnson, owner. Melissa paled. She touched the first paper as though it burned. This is a joke, she stammered. How is this possible? Mr. Williams leaned forward with a serene half-smile. It's no joke, Melissa. Your father was far more careful than you ever imagined. He invested quietly for decades. All these properties belong legally and exclusively to your mother. Tears welled in her eyes. You mean, when I sold the furniture, when I planned to sell the house? Her voice broke. None of that was mine. None of it, I replied, plain, without anger, without pride. It was never yours. She leaned back in the chair, breathless, as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Her face twisted between disbelief and shame. I could almost hear her thoughts screaming, all this time, and I never knew. I lowered my voice, but made each word ring clear as a bell. You treated me like a burden, Melissa. You planned to tear me from the only space that was still mine. But what you didn't know is that Samuel and I had already prepared everything. You never took anything from me. I am still the owner of this house. I am the owner of it all. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Melissa buried her face in her hands, trying to contain her sobs. "My God," she whispered, "what have I done?" I reached my hand toward hers, but not as immediate absolution. You chose to believe I was weak, that I could be discarded. But today, daughter, you must understand, dignity is not negotiable. She lifted her tear-filled eyes, searching for a thread of forgiveness. Mr. Williams cleared his throat and added, "Melissa, not only is your mother the legitimate owner, but she can annul every attempt you and Crystal have made to sell. Legally, you have no claim over these assets whatsoever." Melissa raised her hand to her mouth, her body trembling. "Then, all that's left is my shame." At last, I held her hand firmly. "No, daughter, what's left is the chance to learn, and that is worth more than any property." Her sobs filled the room. I let her cry, because sometimes tears are the only possible prayer. Inside me, there was no vengeance, only the conviction that the lesson began there. If this revelation touched you, like this video now, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey of faith and dignity. Share this story with someone who needs to remember they are never alone. And as we left Mr. Williams' office, Melissa still staggered under the weight of truth. But I knew the real confrontation was yet to come within our own home. The walk back was silent. Melissa walked a few steps behind me, as if chained by something invisible. When we entered, the bare living room seemed emptier still, not for the missing furniture, but for the heaviness between us. I sat at the scratched table, pulled my Bible close, and asked her to sit across from me. She hesitated, but obeyed, her eyes swollen from all the crying in Mr. Williams' office. I laid the deeds on the table. The pages caught the light from the lamp, as though glowing on their own. Melissa ran her hand over the papers, almost reverently. "All of this was Dad's," she murmured, her voice cracking. "And now, it's yours?" I nodded, calm. "Yes, daughter, but understand, this isn't about money. It never was." Samuel worked in silence to ensure we would never lack dignity. And dignity isn't measured by what we have, but by what we refuse to let be taken from us. She lifted her tear-filled eyes. "I sold our memories. I tried to take you out of your own room. I let Crystal, the debts, the fear, carry me away. How could I have done this?" I gripped her hand firmly. "Money can return, Melissa. A house can be rebuilt, furniture can be bought again, but what cannot be sold is respect. The respect you lost with me. Only time and your choices can bring it back." Her sobbing broke open again. Tears fell onto the papers like stains of repentance. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't even deserve to be sitting here." "Forgiveness isn't a prize, daughter," I replied softly. "It's a choice. I've already chosen to forgive you, because I will not let the poison of bitterness consume me. But don't confuse forgiveness with forgetfulness. Some lessons must be learned, and this is one of them." Melissa pressed her hands to her face, weeping. "I only wanted to prove I could make it with Crystal, that I wasn't a burden." "You've always been a burden to me, Melissa, but a burden in the best sense. The sweet weight of a baby in my arms, the weight of responsibilities I accepted with love. I never asked you to be perfect. I only asked for respect. I only asked for truth." I leaned closer. "A mother's love can bear everything, except being treated as disposable." She collapsed again, resting her forehead on my hands. For a moment, I saw the child who once begged forgiveness for breaking my favorite vase, trembling with fear yet waiting to be held. This time, I didn't rush to embrace her. I let the pain dig deep, because only then could the seed of change find room to grow. I lifted the Bible and opened to Proverbs. I read aloud. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. I closed it slowly and let the words hang in the air. Your father understood this. Now it's your turn to understand as well. Melissa wiped her face, her breath still uneven. I want to try, Mom. I don't know how, but I want to. I smiled tenderly, without softening the gravity. Trying is the first step. But remember, broken trust does not return with promises. It returns with actions. From now on, every gesture will show whether you're willing to rebuild the respect you tore apart. She nodded, still in tears. I'll prove it, I swear. Don't swear, daughter. Just live so your actions speak for you. Time will tell. That night, while Melissa fell asleep exhausted in the guest room, the silence of the house felt heavy with peace. But I knew the greatest transformation was yet to come, and it would be painful. The next morning, I found Melissa at the table before dawn broke through the window. Her hair tied back hastily, her face bare of makeup, a pen in her hand and a notebook open, as though ready to write her story without adornment. For a moment, I saw a trace of the little girl who once wrote shopping lists to help Mom. Only now, the list carried another weight: resume, references, job openings, the 6:20 bus. I'm going to work, Mom, she said plainly. Anything honest, anywhere someone needs a hand and the will to try. The words didn't come as a promise, but as a brick. I nodded with the serenity of someone watching the first sprout after a flood. I didn't praise her. Praise too soon intoxicates. I only set before her a cup of coffee and plain bread. Beginning again tastes like bread without butter, dry, honest, sustaining. While she searched for jobs on a cracked phone, the gate creaked. Crystal entered without announcing herself, carrying a large bag and wearing dark glasses even on a cloudy day. She scattered expensive perfume through the empty room as if marking territory. I didn't move. Melissa lifted her eyes, watchful, sensing the conversation would come with a price. We need to talk, Crystal said, setting her bag down like a verdict. I've thought a lot. This whole thing, it isn't for me. Melissa took a second to understand. This whole what? Debt, starting over, crowded buses, she listed, twisting the ring on her finger. I wasn't born to suffer. I love you, Mel. But love is also about choosing environments. You're toxic, and your mother, with all this limits and rules energy, her too, and I'm not going to. The months that followed were unlike anything I could have imagined. The emptiness left by the missing furniture and by wounds became space for something new. The house, once a stage of betrayal and tears, now took on a new meaning. I decided to open its doors, not for business, but for weary souls. Elderly women, abandoned by their families, began arriving one by one. Some carried nothing more than a bag of clothes, others only the weight of loneliness. All of them, without exception, carried stories nobody seemed to want to hear. I transformed the old master bedroom into a place of welcome. Where Crystal once planned her luxurious closet, there now stood a clean bed, a floral quilt, and a bedside table with an open Bible. The walls heard laughter again, not mocking laughter, but the laughter of relief. In the kitchen, the aroma of baking bread replaced the cold silence. The table, once stripped of everything, became a gathering place. Prayers, stories, tears, and embraces mingled in the same space. Each woman who arrived taught me something. There was Ruth, 80 years old, left in a nursing home because she disrupted her daughter's routine. There was Marlene, 74, evicted from her own house after signing documents she didn't understand. And Josephine, 69, who had spent years living in silence, invisible within her family. As I listened to their stories, I realized mine was no exception. It was a mirror. Abandonment, manipulation, the theft of dignity. all were common wounds. But together, we could transform pain into strength. Melissa helped me, now with a changed heart. Work taught her the value of honest sweat, and each act of care was her silent way of asking for forgiveness. Crystal had vanished, taking her empty promises with her, and her disappearance only proved what I had always known. True love does not leave when the ground shakes. Melissa still carried guilt, but little by little she learned that rebuilding respect is a daily task. I saw in her a new seed, sprouting slowly. At night, when the house filled with the voices of women praying together, my heart warmed. There, I understood what Samuel meant when he left those hidden assets. He hadn't just wanted to protect me. He wanted me to have the tools to protect others. My mission was not survival. It was teaching. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with Evelyn. The sunset painted the sky in orange and purple. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. She held my hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "You've turned pain into blessing, Clara. Not just for yourself, but for all of us." I looked to the horizon and answered, "It was God who transformed it. I only opened the door." The wind blew gently, stirring the curtains. I whispered, leaving behind words like an eternal message. Your dignity is not negotiable. It is never too late to begin again. God does not abandon us in our darkest hour. Evelyn closed her eyes, and we began to pray together, not asking for anything, but giving thanks. The porch, with its wooden chairs and simple flowers, became an altar. The future was still a mystery, but it no longer frightened me, because I knew that where faith is planted, hope always blooms. Clara and Evelyn, side by side on the porch, hands clasped, eyes closed in prayer. The open sky above seemed to hear every word. The future was no threat. It was a promise. My friend, if this story spoke to your heart, leave in the comments. What would you do if you were in her place? Your words may be the hope another woman needs today. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us from which city or country you are watching. It's wonderful to see how our family is growing everywhere. Here, every day, there is a new story to remind you that every woman has value and is never alone. With love and faith, I'll be waiting for you tomorrow.